Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I have the most fascinating guest with an incredible story to share with you today. His name is Martin Bodek. He is a native of Brooklyn who currently lives in New Jersey with his wife and three children. He is a technologist by day and a writer by night. He has been writing freelance for over 2 decades, mostly on Jewish interest topics. He recently published his 11th book, which might be his most important one yet, which chronicles his grandfather's World War II memories. His book is titled Zaidy's War: Four Armies, Three Continents, Two Brothers, and is one man's impossible story of endurance. Martin, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Thank you very much for having me. The feeling is absolutely mutual and likewise.
What an incredible story. Before we get into it, I just told you I wanted to read the blurb in the front of the book, which I did read the book and I couldn't put it down. And so I read it, I think, in 2 or 3 days and was just so blown away. I get chills just thinking about your grandfather and his story and the incredible amount of strength and resilience he has or had. Okay, so here
Yeah,
we
and
go.
I haven't been able to put it down either since bringing it into creation. So thank you for that compliment.
And now, when was it published?
October 22. So
Oh,
as we speak, it's the second anniversary of its launch.
yeah. Well, congratulations. I know it's done very well.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to read, just to give the listeners a little bit of a taste of what is in the story. In this wide ranging, heart stopping book, and it really is, the subject's grandson retells his grandfather's life story. Zaidy's journey involves serving four armies under wildly unique circumstances, being present at the largest land invasion in human history and the final battle of World War II, avoiding cannibalism under pain of death, surviving to walk 2,600 kilometers to his home country of Romania, emigrating to Israel, and surviving the pummeling of his new community of Haifa during the Six-Day War. He finally settled in peace in the U.S., where he served as a chef for 40 years and finished Shahs 14
Yes.
times.
Mhm.
Ben Benzian Malik passed away in 2014 at the age of 95. Martin Bodek captures his Zaidy's story in 2003 and has now brought it to life. Well, what I really want to know, don't even know where to start.
Where's our jumping off point?
Where is our jumping off point? Did you know your entire life, like when you were a little boy growing up, did you understand or did you have a clue of what your Zaidi went through? And another question I have, is Zaidi Yiddish for grandfather or slang
Yes.
or okay.
So second question first. Yes,
Uh-huh.
Zaidi is absolutely like abuela in Spanish. Excuse me, abuelo in Spanish. It's just grandfather,
Hmm.
papi. So people actually ask me, that's a strange name, Zaidi, even though we have a popular writer named Zadie Smith.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it seems like it could be a name. No, it just means grandpa or grandfather.
That's kind of what I figured. So, did you sit on his lap and hear these stories? Did your parents talk about it? How did you first realize what Zadie went through?
So I realized that when I was way too young to tolerate such nightmare stories.
Oh,
In my, very Orthodox community,
mhm,
people were very vocal about their World War II experiences, especially those who went through and survived Auschwitz.
mm,
So my grandmother, Zaidy's wife,
mhm,
was very vocal about it. But what was interesting about the story that she had to say was that even to my untrained young ears, it was very typical. They were rounded up in a ghetto, they were shipped off on the trains, they got tattooed, they suffered, they survived, they came home. But when my grandfather told me stories, I remember thinking, and I must have been 6 or 7, this is not a typical story. What I'm hearing from everybody else at all these seminars and grandparents coming down to school to talk, and my friends' grandparents telling their stories, I was like,
Mhm.
my Zaidy story is just a little different from everybody else's. It didn't include Auschwitz, which is a phenomenal piece because most of the time, that's all you hear.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you hear all different kinds of survival stories. Um, Part of it is that people who had different experiences didn't survive them.
Mhm.
We don't, for example, have too many stories from partisans, partisans with the ragtag forest army
Mhm.
that were put together in the forests all over Europe. Not too many people survived to tell those stories. The people who did specific dangerous jobs in concentration camps didn't survive to tell their stories. But my grandfather was not put into that direct circumstance. He faced death in several instances, but
Mhm.
not through the usual means that we heard. And I do know that when I was a kid, I was like, this is different. And one day, because I like reading so much, I'm going to be a writer. And I know I'm going to write the story because it's not anything anyone has ever heard. So
Yeah.
even as a kid, harking back, I'm almost uh, a half century old, but even back then, I knew it was going to be my ambition, and it was probably my first inkling that I was going to be a writer. That may have been the first impetus because I heard a story that needed to be told.
Mhm.
Like Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the universe. So I've always thought if a book doesn't exist, I'm going to have to write it.
Mhm.
And I knew this story was something that needed to exist. And
Mhm.
so it took me a while, but we got there.
So when you would hear his stories, when he would tell you these stories, was it just in little bits and pieces? Did he kind of clean up some of it? Because as a small child, hearing some of the things that, I mean, I'm definitely an adult and I was horrified. It was almost giving me nightmares, just knowing I don't understand how human beings can be so cruel to others. I just don't understand.
So I don't understand either, and I have no answers to such questions. I'm not good with the philosophy of such things. When I
Mhm.
do book talks, I'm asked these questions. Do you think evil exists in the world? Yes. Do you think this can happen again? Yes.
Yes.
Is never again just a slogan? Probably.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but but he did not hold back. He was uncensored, unfiltered.
Mhm.
We'll get to it soon, unless you want to get to it now. But there's a story of desperate brutality
Mhm.
um, that I knew I should not be hearing. I wasn't mature enough to say, Zaidy, I'm 6 years old. This is traumatizing me. I don't know. I've heard the stories from Bobby, it means grandma, and that sounds typical. And I know she's whitewashing it for me because things
Mhm.
must have been really bad, but you're just giving it to me hard.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I was too young to hear such things, but mature enough to know it was important to hear
Mhm.
and that I would pocket these. And perhaps that attitude may have helped me survive.
Mhm.
I don't know what PTSD a 6 or 7 year old could get from hearing such stories,
Mhm.
but my decision to chronicle this may have been a salve, sort of, on my
Mhm.
emotions.
Mhm.
Maybe I unintentionally deferred the reaction to
Mhm.
later, to the point in time in my own
Mhm.
history when I would chronicle the book.
Mhm.
Certainly worth exploring, perhaps. But yeah, I was way too young, but I knew I was going to write it,
Mhm.
and here we are, many, many,
Yeah.
many years later, with the book in hand.
So I'm even wondering as you were writing it and you were, bringing up, all of these situations and the things that Zadie went through, were you almost kind of like reliving it in a certain way, either, putting yourself in his shoes, in his position, or even just remembering sitting at his knee, listening to his stories, going, "Oh my gosh, don't want to hear all of these details."
Yeah, I certainly did when I was putting this all together.
Hmm.
When we got the story from him, I sat down with my mom and recorded him
Hmm.
on VHS. You know what VHS is?
I
Uh,
remember.
I guess you need to be I don't know what, Y or Z to not have
Uh-huh.
any idea what that stuff is. Recorded it on VHSs. Um, and as I was going through the experience of writing the book,
Hmm.
so he gave it to us in a jumble, right?
Hmm.
He was all over the place. I remember he was 83 when we got his story, 12 years before his passing.
Hmm.
And he gave it to us in a jumble, like a great big ball of rubber bands, right? Just a big mush. And I had
Hmm.
to, when I started chronicling it, lay it out on some sort of a timeline.
Yeah.
And that's why the book is a linear book. It's not one
Hmm.
of those books that jump from
Hmm.
current to past.
Hmm.
Those books certainly have value and their place, but I just wanted to lay it out in a straight line
Hmm.
because just doing that itself was really difficult. And the
Hmm.
only way I could get everything right is if I didn't jump back and forth. That would be
Hmm.
silly of me. Just laid it out. And when I laid it out and I started going through each year and each period and each month,
Hmm.
the specific experiences that he had were really impactful.
Hmm.
And I remember I was a little emotionally drained from it
Oh.
because I had to part ways with his story
Hmm.
for a little bit to focus on what happened to his family because his family did encounter Auschwitz,
Hmm.
and most were eliminated when they arrived.
Hmm.
So I had to research Mengele and I had to research everything that happened to them and I had to research the transportation systems and I had to
Hmm. Hmm.
chronicle what exactly happened to them in the last moments. And those were difficult. Those
Hmm.
were, I remember I was not in the best of moods for that period of time.
Hmm.
And I'd like breathe every once in a while. I'd lay the story down. I'd string the text together of everything that's happening. I'd grab the research and chronicle everything. And it was hard. It was hard. The
Yeah.
Auschwitz ones were really hard because I took great pains with each chapter. I did the best Dickens that I could. The great writers, as soon as you set down in a scene anywhere you are, a
Hmm.
train, a car, a locale, a town, you want
Hmm.
to describe everything that's happening
Hmm.
because the best writers set the tone and set the stage so you can see the
Hmm.
stage in front of you.
Hmm.
So I did that every time there was a location. So when my grandfather comes to Auschwitz, and when my great uncle comes to Buchenwald, and when my grandfather comes to Haifa or to
Hmm.
Borough Park,
Hmm.
where he finished out the rest of his life,
Hmm.
tried to paint the scene. So to paint the scene of Auschwitz accurately, so I can
Hmm.
portray exactly the way it was, so I can portray what kind of monster Mengele actually was,
Hmm.
was difficult emotionally,
Hmm.
but rewarding as a writer because I felt like I got it right.
Hmm.
To give as vivid a description as possible to set the reader into the proper place to emotionally understand what you're surrounded by. Following that motif, you look at the cover. So I've been told by readers that when you hold this book, your hands chill, right? Because this is what I was trying to portray with the picture. This represents my grandfather's experience in Russian Siberia,
Right.
and I was very pleased that I found this picture because it does give you the absolute sensation of
Hmm.
of cold, and that's where he found himself for three and
Hmm.
a half years.
Well, I have to tell you that you did an absolute brilliant job in laying everything out and describing everything because I really felt like I was there with the description and everything. And what I found really fascinating in the book, and I wasn't expecting this, but once I finished the story, and then you actually have included in the book, like the conversations that you had with your Zaidy and your mom and, as you were interviewing him, and I have to tell you, I thought it was absolutely adorable that as a grown man, you still call your mother mommy.
Okay, maybe it's cultural. I'm not sure, but she's my mommy. It's
Yeah.
like, I still have cereal for breakfast every day. There's just things you just don't outgrow because you forget to transition to
Right.
adulthood. Well, my
Right.
mommy's my mommy. What am I gonna do?
Well, I have to say, I have four sisters. and which was really interesting growing up that way in this Eastern European household. And my mother was mummy and my father was daddy up until the day they died.
Okay.
And we still refer to them as mummy and daddy when we talk about them. So when I came to that, I just thought it was really adorable. It really touched my heart.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, like when, you know, it's called a diminutive when you add a e at the end of someone's name, or
Hmm.
in Yiddish you add like chavala, right?
Uh-huh.
So there is a certain age where that falls off, right?
Hmm.
But if you call your mom and dad certain something, like when do you decide, well, now it's over. We're all grown up here.
Yeah.
So
Now I'll just
now,
call you George
yeah.
instead of
So
daddy.
I don't
Yeah.
know if that ever works. I would say that most people just call them their folks the same thing they've called them their entire lives.
Hmm.
My guess. I'm not a sociologist.
Okay, so now when the book came out, was it a feeling of like surreal to you?
It was a tremendous satisfaction because
Mm.
it was the longest project I had ever undertaken. We interviewed him in 2003 and it
Hmm.
was published in 2022.
Hmm.
It did sit on the shelf for a very, very long time
Hmm.
because, as you introduced me, I am a technologist by day and a writer by night, and
Hmm.
that's where things hold for the moment. Um, and so it took a long time to get there, and I was not a writer yet. I had not
Hmm.
published my first book until 2010. So, 7 years old, I knew I needed to get the story.
Hmm.
Uh, in my early, it was in my mid 30s.
Hmm.
Okay, now we're gonna get the story.
Hmm.
And then in my mid 40s, okay, now we got to sit down and write the story.
Yeah.
And the translation from the Yiddish conversation into English took 2 years.
Wow.
So even that process, it was painstaking. And even that process was just when that concluded was extremely rewarding in and of itself.
Yes.
Done with the 2 years of translation, I was like, let out a deep breath, and then I set out to set things, in the array on the timeline.
Hmm.
But that was exhausting and very rewarding. And when I received the whole thing, I probably experienced what every writer experiences when their book arrives for the first time in the mail, and you open it up and there it is.
Hmm.
It's not literally 19 years of work sitting there, and it included the work I had to do to become a writer in the first place,
Hmm.
and all the striving and unknowingness of the industry, and
Hmm.
going from self-publishing to signing a few contracts and maturing. So that was really the culmination of my entire writing experience. So it was truly, truly rewarding, not just from finishing this book, but some sort of a conclusion to my maturation as a writer.
So when did you decide you wanted to be a writer? I mean, was did this come after knowing that you were going to write a book, even when you were 6 years old, about your Zaidy story? But so when did you actually start writing? I mean, because you've been doing it a long time. I figured you were just kind of like born a writer.
No, I don't think anyone's born a writer. Um,
That's true.
very, very young. I still have the first book I ever wrote. It was a book about a sweater that comes to life. I was about 6 years old, and I wrote it in a little notebook, and I have it at home. I encounter it every year when I clean up the house for Passover, um, and it's just very cute that I have that. But I've always been a voracious reader,
Hmm.
um, and I always say, you know, just because you're a fan of music doesn't mean you can
Hmm.
be a great guitarist or a great drummer. It doesn't
Hmm.
translate the same way. But
Hmm.
if you love reading, you are
Hmm.
automatically halfway to being a great writer. In my humble opinion, because
Hmm.
because absorbing material
Hmm.
makes you understand what is good
Hmm.
and what is bad. You instantly know it as a
Hmm.
as a voracious reader.
Hmm.
So my voracious reading was brought me already halfway there when I was
Hmm.
still 7, 8, 9 years old.
Hmm.
And I knew that I was just biding my time, trying to figure out, when is my time?
Uh-huh.
When is it going to be? And in 2010, when I wrote my first book, I called it Bush 2, Book 1. It was a King James version of the Bush presidency. He was sort of He was sort of a religious talking figure, even though he may not have been a fully religious man. But he quoted scripture, and I was like, you know what? If I put the background of it as if King James ordered its, commissioned its writing,
Hmm.
so I, you know, mocked it all up, and
Uh-huh.
it looked pretty good, and I put it out there. Didn't sell much, but it was my first foray, and
So,
that
okay,
was
so I
yeah.
have to ask you, is it still up on Amazon? Is it available on Amazon? So
Oh
if I
yeah,
looked
yeah.
it up, would I?
Everything I have nothing out of print. Everything is still there. You can have a
Okay,
look.
so it's Bush to.
Bush 2, Book 1, because I wrote it during his second term, right? And I was going to expand it to Obama and Trump and Biden, but I've moved on to other projects.
Well, maybe you could do that, in the future, because I think
Yeah.
that's hilarious. I've got to look this up. I think that's absolutely hilarious.
So have a look. Yeah, it's languishing there. It's my least selling book of all.
Uh-huh.
Other books have been successful, but no one's first book could ever just yeah, shoot for the moon. I aimed
Uh-huh.
for the moon, but I'm still proud of it.
Yeah.
It's a
Oh,
nice little story. So that was the point of raising this is just that was my first one.
uh-huh.
And that set me on the path. And then I
Hmm.
scrounged a little, had other ideas.
Hmm.
But I knew that the pinnacle would be this book.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if I have it in me to write something that is as meaningful,
Hmm.
although I am plotting.
Hmm. I can see it. I can see the smoke coming out of your ears.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's totally leaking out of of my brain cells. But so far, as you
Hmm.
mentioned at the beginning, this is my most important book. And perhaps there'll be more.
Well, I always tell people that writing a book is like eating potato chips. You just can't stop at just one. Once you get the first book out and you get over the shock that you've done it, it's like, okay, let's move on. And I got a whole lot to say about a whole lot of stuff. And then, at some point you just kind of have to say, okay, let's just, like you said, take a deep breath, settle back. I'll know when the time is right.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I am pouring out with ideas. So I don't
Hmm.
know if you ever heard of something called NaNoWriMo. Have you ever heard of this thing?
Yeah, I have. I'm not sure
Okay.
what it is, but
It's National Novel Writing Month,
oh, okay.
acronym NaNoWriMo.
Hmm.
So every time just before NaNoWriMo arrives, so NaNoWriMo begins November 1st, which is nigh. Um, I send out a book report of
Uh-huh.
sorts to chronicle how, and I send it to my friends and I put it on my website, martinbodekbooks.com, before we forget
Oh,
to
yes.
shamelessly plug
Okay.
me.
Of course.
And it's a book report and it says, this is how all my books are doing. And these are
Uh-huh.
all the ideas that I'm working on and actively. And these are all the ideas that are sitting here inside of
Hmm.
my head. So there are
Hmm.
ideas galore. Um,
Hmm.
every year I also publish, every time I publish a book, I publish where it is in comparison to my own height. So, so I have a stack of, well, it's 12 books now. I published a
Uh-huh.
satire Haggadah. We can get to that later if you'd like. And it reaches the bottom of my calf.
Okay.
So, so I intend to write a book a year at least
Oh my
until I'm
God.
120 years old, and maybe it'll reach me right here. That is the goal.
I hope you're not real tall.
No, what am I? 5'8.5". I should be able to make it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's still, that's still fairly tall, but anyway. So I didn't realize that. I mean, I know I had heard that nano whatever and seen it before, but the funny thing that you said November 1st, I did not know any of this because I am working on, well, two more books right now. And the one I'm working on now, it's like, oh, it's been like coughing up a hairball, really a whole lot of fun. But it's like, okay, I set November to be the month. I kind of cleared my calendar with everything else so I could really concentrate and spend more time because there's something about November. It's starting to get, the days are shorter, the nights are longer. You're starting to get that feeling of winter and cuddling up and stuff. And to me, it just says creative expression. So,
That's interesting. Maybe the founders also felt something of this in the air. But certainly check out the website. Just Google it, and maybe you can use it as a tool.
mhm.
It helps you keep track of words per day.
Uh-huh.
It wants you to have written 50,000 words before the end of the month. So the
Okay.
average is 1667 per day. And
Uh-huh.
so I do it every year.
Uh-huh.
And perhaps sometimes you can keep up with the demand and the standard, and sometimes
Uh-huh.
not. But at the end of the month, you're certainly a heck of a lot further along than you would have been, I think,
And
if
tell me again, it's
without the program. NaNoWriMo, National
nano.
Novel Writing Month.
Okay. All right. That's on my to-do list. I will be doing that this afternoon after we sign off. So
Excellent.
now back to the book. As you
Sure.
were writing it, did you feel your Zaidy? Did you kind of feel his presence as you were doing it? Did you kind of like talk to him and say, "Hey, am I doing okay here?" What was that like? Because to me, it would be just having that connection with him and telling the story. It's like, oh, God, I hope I get this right.
So I'm going to get a little spooky with you.
Oh, good.
I certainly
Okay.
felt his presence because I felt it in a very poignant way. I started dreaming about him. So we can either presume that he bubbled up into my dream state
Mm-hmm.
because he was on my mind all the time, or
Mm-hmm.
perhaps he was visiting me to let me know that he approves. But I
Mm-hmm.
kept dreaming always that I was walking down the street with him, and he'd never speak with me. He would just accept compliments from the neighbors
Uh-huh.
about how handsome he looks. Um, and this happened a lot. It was the same typical dream over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And the interpretation that I had, what my subconscious was trying to tell me, is that there's some form of approval going
Mm-hmm.
on here. And the fact that neighbors were saying how good he looks, I thought what could be interpreted as approval for my book. That is a quality object and something
Mm-hmm.
worth people's attention. So this happened on occasion. So
Wow.
depending where you are in your hocus pocus spectrum,
Uh-huh.
um, that was my experience with him. I felt him approving, not
Mm-hmm.
guiding me along, but approving of the
Mm-hmm.
work. I
Mm-hmm.
certainly felt that in a very profound way.
Interesting, because that's kind of what I thought your answer was going to be.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it felt pretty real. It's
Mm-hmm.
one heck of a way to get approval.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So when the book came out, and I'm thinking about your family, okay, because I'm not only thinking about, I'm thinking about your children,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking about their children when they have them. I don't know how old they are, but what an incredible legacy for you to leave them. What was the reaction of your family and even in your community? Because there probably were people who had known him. I mean,
Yes.
what was their reaction?
Everyone was very proud.
I'll bet.
Very, very well received. And I wrote it partly as a legacy for my children. The book is
Mhm.
actually dedicated to my son,
Mhm.
Ranan. And the I like to keep my dedications extremely short. Oh, I don't think you could see it against the background.
Well, you know what?
Whoop.
Why don't I
You
just
have your
pick
own
up my
copy?
hello?
Ah, there we are.
There we
Um,
are. So just right
so
at the
if you go
beginning. So hang on.
right past the table of contents to the dedication page.
Oh, yes, you are a man of few words. I do remember even when I saw this, you get right to the point.
Yes. So it's Exodus 13:8, and that
Mhm.
quote is, "And thou shalt tell your children." So
Oh.
so that is exactly the purpose of my book.
Hmm.
So the cool factor for my kids is at the end of the book, I have genealogy charts to seriously important figures in Jewish history, including
Hmm.
the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism.
Hmm.
And my kids are absolutely enamored with that. And my cousins, ultra-Orthodox cousins, are
Hmm.
really, really into genealogy in a
Hmm.
major, major way, and that's probably their favorite part of the book.
Hmm.
So I
And I
received,
see
yes,
at the end of the book too, you have included the Amsterdam Publishers Holocaust Library. So you
yes.
do have a lot more, resources and books. And I see here you go. This one was somebody that I lost him now. Where was he? but it was one of my guests, somebody I had interviewed, Max Friedman.
Oh, Max Friedman, well, lovely.
Yeah. Yeah.
He had a talk in my local library. Very cool.
Oh, really? And then there's who was it? Is it Wolf? I can't remember his first
And
name
Rob
right.
Wolf.
Yep, there you
Rob
go.
Wolf. All
Yeah.
right.
Yep. Spoke to them. I mean, I
He's
just
made his
find it
rounds.
I think it's so fascinating, and it makes me so happy that people are sharing these stories. I just think it's such an important part of our history that a lot of people just kind of try and either, push away or ignore or deny even, go figure that one out. And the fact that so many people are coming forward and telling their stories in these books and in a way that so we don't ever forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll get to that thought in a second. I just wanted to complete my thought with the question you just asked a minute ago.
Sure.
Everyone was proud of me. Um, and my cousins, they're all ultra Orthodox. I have 44 first cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents are sort of the black sheep in their Hasidic families. So
Oh, okay.
that's how I am, what I
Uh-huh.
am, who I am, the way I am. So we live a life apart.
Uh-huh.
Um, and but this brought us closer because they were my research team. I would check
Oh,
everything with them. They would provide me more materials. They
uh-huh.
had pictures. They had projects that their kids did in school that helped provide more information.
Wow.
And I'm very proud to say that this book exists on shelves
Mm-hmm.
in homes of Satmar Hasidim
Mm-hmm.
who have a contentious, shall we say, relationship with the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see from the cover, the Israeli flag flies proudly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's on their shelves. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a measure of pride that's unimaginable. I didn't even expect that. I figured they'd be nice. They'd just take off the cover and keep the book. No, the
Uh-huh.
cover is just the way it is. Um, and my kids are enamored uh, with the book, and they now fully know who my grandfather was.
Mm-hmm.
Also still impressed by the genealogy charts.
Mm-hmm.
I am a 10th great grandchild of the Baal Shem Tov, as I said before, the founder of Hasidism, and
Mm-hmm.
people are so into it. It's wild. But the person whose approval I really, really wanted was my mom's.
Mm-hmm.
That mattered to me most of all.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what? I will tell you the story that I usually finish my talks with. But we'll do
Okay.
that now because the moment feels right.
Okay.
So I finished the book, I received it, and my mother was one of the first recipients. So I signed it for her and I handed it off to her. And she was just, gee, woohoo, you know, filled with pride and love and kisses, and it was wonderful. So she took it from me, ran into my living room, sat down for 4.5 hours. The rest of the family did whatever the heck they were doing. She comes out and she goes, Matra. Matra is my Yiddish name.
Okay.
She goes, Matra, I have a problem with you. I'm like, Ma, I've been working on this for 19 years. This is your first comment. Look what I did. Look what I put together. I sound very Seinfeldian right now. Look what I did. Look what I put together. How could you complain? So she goes, look, it's wonderful that you did put this together. It's wonderful that you worked with my cousins, and it's wonderful that I was your research partner. But at the end of the book, you have tributes to other members of the family, and you have headstones for each of them. And that's very nice, and I liked seeing that. Why don't you have a picture of the headstone for Zaidy? So I was like, huh. So the honest answer was that I had forgotten. Simple oversight. But she wouldn't be happy with that. So I quickly derived an answer out of some creative part of my brain. And I meant what I said, though. I said to her, Mommy, I didn't write this book to give Zaidi a place to rest. I wrote it to bring him to life. So she was charmed for a second. And she goes, okay, nice try. But I want you to put it in. And that's a true story.
Mhm. Well,
That's
I
how I
think
usually finish.
that was an absolute brilliant way of getting out of that, but she just wasn't letting you off the hook.
No, she wasn't. And that's actually how I conclude my talks,
Hmm.
and it transitions very well to the Q&A portion.
Hmm.
Instead of ending with a trauma or some other kind of flourish, it's like a sweet story. So I use
Hmm.
that, and that's been very effective. So that answers
Just
the first question. Yes.
Whoops, I'm just holding it up one more time for the
Okay.
people on not Facebook, what am I saying? On YouTube, so you can see the picture, the cover, and yeah, I'm getting cold chills just looking at that because I know how brutally cold, and the conditions that Zaidy survived. I got to ask you, Martin, how do you think he did that? I mean, I know he was, in reading the book, I got the impression he was a lifelong learner, that's for sure. He was a man of very strong faith, and family and community meant an awful lot to him. And is that what brought him through?
Actually, that's the question that I get. People always want to hear about the religious aspect of things, for Zaidy.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes they ask it because in certain forums they don't want to hear about the religious aspect of things. So people kind of dance around, when I set up the talk, they're like, is it religious-y? Is it not? And I always get the sense I understand in certain environments it's not what you want to hear. So I'm honest with everyone.
Yeah.
His survival is not one of those stories where, oh, he had faith, rock solid faith in his God, and he saw him through. No, 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 no. That's not why he survived. Um, and I always got this as part of the Q&A session, but I
Hmm.
started putting it into the middle as sort of a mini editorial,
Hmm.
because the question of how he survived always comes up. So I always say, no, it was not his faith that put him
Hmm.
through. It was the fact that he was in survival mode the whole time.
Hmm.
And I've read dozens and dozens and dozens of Holocaust memoirs in my life, and I
Hmm.
editorialize by saying survival in World
Hmm.
War II is a triad of ideas working together. First,
Hmm.
you have to be lucky.
Hmm.
You can't do anything without luck. You have to be one of the ones who the Nazis didn't look at and shoot at random.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's just what brought you to survival. The other, you have to make decisions.
Hmm.
Survival was not a passive aggressive affair. You
Hmm.
you had to decide at certain points, and you didn't know whether your decision was going to be correct or not,
Hmm.
what you were going to do. Do I volunteer for this job or do I
Hmm.
not? Do I stand in this line or do I not?
Hmm.
Um, the job that they just put up on the board and invite people to do, is it something I want to sign up for or not? Should I
Hmm.
resist this task that's being set for me today or should I not? Do I sneak over to that side? Do I sneak over to this side? But you have to do one of these in order to survive. Finally, calories. Um, One of the things you will note in every Holocaust memoir, everyone will record how hungry they were.
Hmm.
Every single one. It's not missing from any book. You will always find a person who says, "It's so hard. I'm hungry." And they will really portray it because it's an annoying thing that nobody can ever forget.
Hmm.
If and famously, for example, Elie Wiesel's father died 2 weeks before liberation. His life ran out and he died of starvation.
Hmm.
And my great aunt died of starvation as well, as I record in the book.
Hmm.
So if you manage to get extra calories, one way or another, that was part of this triumvirate of
Hmm.
survival concepts working in concert. And that is why my grandfather survived.
Hmm.
And actually, people of faith ask me, they press like, but his faith, he believed in his God. And I'm like, that's not the story I was told. I'm not going to be a charlatan, and I'm not going to give it to you in any kind of
Hmm.
fake way. That's not what he ever told me. It wasn't because he said a specific prayer every day. And it wasn't,
Hmm.
you hear famous stories. Lord, if you save me from this, I will do such and such
Hmm.
after the war.
Hmm.
No, there was no bargaining.
Hmm.
Um, my grandfather specifically said, when I asked him, as I was interviewing him, I asked, when did you find time to do anything ritualistic involving our religion? Did you honor Hanukkah? or Passover or Shavuot or anything. And he looked at me crossly and he said, "What? No, I was trying to survive.
Mm-hmm.
There's no time for any of this." I put it on hold. And once my
Mm.
survival was in place, I went back to what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also something completely uncommon. This doesn't sell well in certain forums,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially in school environments, they don't want me to say anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't leave a good impression on students. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the things I leave out. I also leave out any of the cannibalism piece
Mm-hmm.
of this survival story. So those two things are the questions I always ask. Is this on the table? Is it not? Usually it depends on the age of the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, school above school, they allow me to tell it. School and impressionable, they don't. But that is the fact. Faith was not his survival method or story.
Mm-hmm.
It was calories, luck, and decisions
Mm-hmm. Well,
for sure.
he made a lot of decisions, and there were many decisions as I was reading through the story where I'm holding my breath going, "Oh God, I don't think you should do that," blah, blah, blah. But it's like, okay, Cheryl, stop it. Obviously, turned out okay. But then tell us about, because was he a very like learned man? I mean, because he read, okay, and I'm gonna butcher this. He read the Shahs 14 times. Is that the
Yes,
same as the Talmud, or
that is the Talmud. Yes.
that is the Talmud? Yeah,
Shas
so
is an acronym for a different Hebrew phrasing. It's too long to repeat.
okay.
But yes, Shas is the Talmud. The Talmud is a 2,711 page recording of Jewish law
Mm-hmm.
history.
Mm-hmm.
I go through it myself. I've been through it twice myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in my third round, and my grandfather did it 14 times.
Mm-hmm.
The program started, in case the readers are curious, in 1923. And it concludes every 7.5 years. And lately, there's a great gala at several stadiums in the Northeast
Mm-hmm.
and in other places as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's what he wanted to get to that the war interrupted.
Ah.
Very learned, spent his time in the study halls
Mm-hmm.
in Romania. Was chavruta. What is the English word? Learning partner. He was
Mm-hmm.
learning partners with some extreme luminaries of the age and of the time
Mm-hmm.
and of the place. And that's just what uh, got in his way. Was, as a matter of fact, I write in the book, there's that only something on the order of magnitude of a world war could get in the way of him studying,
Mm-hmm.
and that is exactly what
Mm-hmm.
happened. That is
Mm-hmm.
just precisely what happened. And once the war was over, he went back to his religious existence
Mm-hmm.
and to his learning, which he
Mm-hmm.
carried on until the end of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And he completed. He used to learn. He used to come home after he was let go from his job due to ageism, which is a separate, you know, bit of heartbreak in
Yeah.
his life. He used to come home from, I don't know, taking money from one bank to the other, shopping for fruits. He
Uh-huh.
did interesting tasks. He used to sit up in his bed and learn the Talmud for 6.5 hours a night,
Wow.
6.5 hours every night. And he actually, I did the math recently. He concluded the Talmud, I think, 6 times in the last 12 years of his life. And that's what he did. That's how he spent his time. And certainly after my grandmother passed away, he certainly had the free time to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud of him for that and for being my guiding light as far as that is concerned as well.
Mm-hmm. What do you think he would say to you right now if he could, because maybe you'll have a dream, or maybe he'll show up, tonight and say, but what do you think he would say to you?
I think he would say, "Good job." He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't he wasn't lavish with his praise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He was sparing, and that's
Mm-hmm.
fine.
Mm-hmm.
He would say, "Good job. You got all the details pretty accurate."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and he'd say, "I'm proud of you." He wouldn't say he wouldn't say it so overtly, but maybe he'd mumble it under his breath. That's what I imagine might come out of his mouth. I'd like to imagine that he'd be like, "Oh my gosh, you're the greatest grandson that God ever created." But no, he'd,
Mm-hmm.
he'd just be sparing, and I would accept it lovingly.
Hmm. So, in the future, as you do have more books coming down the pike, I know you do. Um, are you going to have any more that along the lines of, history, Jewish history? What do you think about that?
So I am working on a spin-off. That's my NaNoWriMo project.
Okay.
And the spin-off is there's a sliver of the story that deserves to be drawn out.
Oh.
Just before, as my grandfather was languishing, excuse me, in the Russian military encampment in
Hmm.
Siberia, his family was shipped off to Auschwitz in 1944.
Hmm.
The last act my grandmother did before being hoarded onto the trains was to bury the family jewelry
Hmm.
and documents and pictures in a little box and buried it in the backyard.
Hmm.
My great uncle, Zaidy's brother, witnessed this, survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald, came home, and waited until my grandfather arrived,
Hmm.
and then they dug up this box together.
Hmm.
The contents of that box are all that we have
Hmm.
from my family. The only single item I have from my great grandmother is a little watch face that she bought for my grandfather, and that's the only thing that I have.
Hmm.
A a ring that my great grandmother wore
Hmm.
was inherited by my grandmother,
Hmm.
which passed to my mother, who
Hmm.
was looking to buy a gift for my wife,
Hmm.
who took one diamond of this ring and put it into a pendant, which my wife wears around her neck to the present day, and I smile every single time I see it.
Hmm.
I want to write a book of stories like this.
Hmm.
I want people's objects that have survived war
Hmm.
to be used in the present day.
Mm.
I have many, many examples of this, and this one is even sweet and benign. Uh, but there are objects in my family. My wife's candlesticks, which she inherited from her great grandmother,
Hmm.
survived a march from Belgium to the UK. And I brought it over from the UK past security. As you can imagine, a candlestick looks like a muzzle inside of a backpack. That wasn't that was, oh boy, was that nerve-wracking. I We had contingency plans if it was confiscated.
Wow.
We had yeah, that was touchy. And now it sits in the corner of her house and is used
Hmm.
every Shabbat.
Hmm.
I'm looking for stories like that. The book is tentatively titled "If These Objects Could Talk."
Mm.
And
That's
that
good.
is what I'm going to be focused on for NaNoWriMo. There are all different sorts of Holocaust Torahs,
Hmm.
violins, and other instruments
Hmm.
that have gone
Hmm.
through who knows what, pieces of art,
Hmm.
and many, many such stories that I'm going to be chasing.
Hmm.
And that is my next Holocaust story. I don't want to be a one-trick pony.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know, but most of what I put out are parody Haggadot.
Hmm.
Haggadot are the pamphlets that are read during the Passover meal.
Hmm.
That's mostly what I traffic in. I'm actually concluding the dad jokes Haggadah as we speak,
God.
but I certainly don't want to be a one-trick pony. So that's my next Holocaust book, and then we see what goes next. But that's what's going to be taking up the next
Hmm.
month of my life.
Hmm. Well, I absolutely love your sense of humor. I
I
have to say
appreciate
that.
that.
Yes. And you have to promise me that when that book is published, that you will contact me and you'll come back on the show and talk about it.
Yeah, you have my word.
Okay, good.
I
Because,
even took my hand off these airplane controls to
yeah,
to
because I will
swear.
track you down. I have skills, as you can
Okay,
see.
I understand.
Yes. Okay. Well, Martin, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. It was an honor to read your book. I mean, again, I still get chills when I think about it, and I think of some of the specific situations that not only Zaidy was in, but the other men that were with him, and the ones that didn't survive, and all of the people that didn't survive breaks my heart.
Yeah, the story is there's a lot of heartbreak, no
Hmm.
question, laced throughout the entire story. But the point of the story is that if you put your mind to it, you can
Yeah.
really accomplish a great many things. You can accomplish
Hmm.
survival itself by staying focused on the prize, and you could
Hmm.
inspire your children and grandchildren and generations to come. So I owed it to my grandfather to put this book together and present it to the world. And I appreciate your time and your contribution in making this a reality.
Okay, so now I want you to, all of your links are in the show notes already, but I would like for you to articulate, I like for the guests to tell my audience where they can find you, how they could connect with you, get your book, anything else that you want to, promote. Now's the time.
Okay, so I've got several book talks coming up. I've recently found that libraries are very, very welcoming to me, whether or not they have budgets or not. So I'll be all over the New York, New Jersey area, putting out my flyers everywhere. I am at martinbodekbooks.com, and I keep that as live and current as I can all the time. And that's where you could find everything about me. Aside from that, nothing that I've ever published is out of print. The first books and the first scratchings and attempts at publishing, they all exist. They're all out there. Um, and find me on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and everywhere. And my books are in libraries all over the place, which is very rewarding. And I'm not hiding from the planet. On Martin Bodek Books, you can send me email, and you could sign up for constant updates. So thank you. Please
One
drop
more
by.
time, showing the book cover to the YouTube audience. So thanks again so much for being on the show. And I really mean it. I would love for you to come back, especially once you finish your next book. And I want to hear all about it. And, it would be really interesting, if these things could talk, because I used to have dreams. I have a lot of antiques and I have a lot of my grandmother's furniture as well. And years ago, I used to have dreams that some of my furniture was haunted,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
And it was kind of creepy. And then I realized maybe I shouldn't eat pizza before I go to bed at night. So maybe that was it, but it was really weird.
Okay. Whatever's on our mind get just bubbles over into our sleeping consciousness.
Yes, it does. Well, thanks again, Martin. I've just so enjoyed having you on the show. Love the conversation and congratulations on the book. I know that your grandfather is so proud of you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
I can say it even though he wouldn't.
that. Thanks for covering.
You're welcome. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Please share this episode with everyone you know. I mean, it is an amazing story. The book is fantastic. It's something that everybody, I think, needs to educate themselves on what happened not that many years ago when you think about it. And we really do need to share our stories and to make sure that never again really is more than just a slogan. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.